Alright, y'all. We are here live on stream. We got some news updates going on that's going on in Iran. We have several strike packages that's coming, um, and videos is coming on the show. I hope you are strapped in and ready to go because stuff is getting very serious. Um, one sec. Got some information coming in. One sec, y'all. Um, After several strikes hitting Iran, and mass explosions that's going on right now in Iran. This was just 2 hours ago. So yeah, let's check it out. One sec, we're having some audio difficulty real quick. 1 second, y'all. I apologize for this. I'll go ahead and rewind that. You see the smoke out there in the distance. Here's some pictures. As you can see, the two. Boom. Massive explosion. So the ultimatum is here. The ultimatum is that either they open the Strait of Hormuz in the next 48 hours by Monday night, um, or they're going to cut Iran off the power grid, starting with the biggest power plant first. Um, Iran has said that they are going to retaliate and put all of the Middle East in darkness. I mean, I am starting a poll right now. We got a poll out, y'all, right now. Um, but anyway, Trump has sent him an ultimatum. Like I said, um, we still haven't seen the face of the new Shah yet, so I'm not for sure what's going on with that. They're saying that he is in Russia. Not for sure. I think he's dead probably, and they're just covering it up. Um, um, so, and another thing. Let's go to that's the ultimatum. So yeah, there you see it that that they actually saying that he could be in a coma and he did lose a leg and probably is disfigured. Um, let's see about this. See what's going on about the airports. So, but anyways, all right. So back to the regular news. So let's go here. Let's bring this over here. Oh shoot. Okay, all right. But anyway, so I should have started. Yep, I started. I started. Okay. But anyways,
The oil crisis is well underway at this point if it had not been underway already. We have been able to see that multiple countries, around 22, have stated willingness to become involved in military operations to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but so far we have not seen any publicized announcements from these 22 countries and their supposed or future involvement in the clearing of the Strait of Hormuz. We did get a statement today from the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, largely confirming that there are multiple NATO countries that will be future involved in clearing the Strait of Hormuz, but we have not been able to see which countries those are at the moment right now. We've also been able to hear that there has been some other significant news that it does seem that U.S. officials are now saying that the United States is largely being forced to conduct some form of a ground operation on Iran, either within the area of the Strait of Hormuz or within the area of Karg Island. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz would have to be dealt with first before any attempted landings on Karg Island. Additionally, we have also been able to get some reports, interestingly enough, that the Iranians declared that they shot down an F 15 EX Strike Eagle over the area of Bandar Abbas today. And when we watch the footage, it actually turns out that they mistook the aircraft firing off chaff and flares to be able to avoid the incoming missile as a direct hit, meaning that the F 15 was not even hit at all, and the Iranians completely misidentified or absolutely lied about what they were looking at. No F 15 has been shot down over Hormuz today, and it does appear that the sortie was a success by that particular F 15 and it returned back to its operational airbase safely. We've also been able to get further news that Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates has been directly attacked, and significant attacks and impacts have been seen throughout the area of southern Israel, as it does appear that Israel's air defense perimeter has largely been degraded to the point of unusability. And it now also does appear, quite obviously at this point, that the Israelis, as far as their missile based air defenses, were for naught, and it does not appear that any laser based missile defense systems exist within Israel to be able to conduct a proper defense. Still, the Israelis are moving forward with a ground offensive into southern Lebanon to reach the banks of the Litani River and push the Hezbollah forces back from the Israelis' northern border, and we are seeing that they are already destroying bridges within that area in preparations for the larger offensive. We've now also heard that the United States are now encouraging the Kurds to not get involved in the military operation for certain reasons. Outside the Middle East, we have been able to see some other significant developments on the other side of the world here in the Americas. as the President of the United States stated today that they were going to take Cuba and that he can do really whatever he wants with it, according to his words. This comes as the country has been in another significant power outage, and while we have seen that this power outage has left around 10 million citizens of communist Cuba without electricity, we're seeing some large fires breaking out in Havana at the moment, and we're not really sure what those are. We also heard one U.S. official state that Cuba is planning to conduct offensive actions against the United States of America. With what? But anyways, moving on out of Cuba, we've also been able to hear that the state of Ukraine has conducted major attacks against St. Petersburg over the night. And when I mean major attacks, I mean it looked like the Blitz in World War II over London, over St. Petersburg tonight. Significant amounts of Ukrainian drones were able to overrun the St. Petersburg air defense perimeter and were able to make it well into the city. Explosions were being reported over the entirety of the area, and we've also been able to see that air defenses, the very few that existed in the area, were heavily active at the time. We've also been able to see the Ukrainian armed forces have been inflicting significant losses onto the Russian Federation's army once again today, and the Russian Federation has taken even more significant losses over the past 24 hours. And this came with a shocking announcement today, as the Ukrainian armed forces have now announced, or the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the AFU, has announced that they will no longer be sending any of their soldiers abroad because, and I quote, modern Western doctrine is obsolete for modern warfare, and therefore Ukrainian forces deployed overseas for overseas training are actually learning nothing of value and substance at this point for modern combat operations on the front. Meaning that according to Ukrainian battlefield analysis, westernized training, even in NATO countries in Europe and in the United States, no longer provide the proper kind of training and understanding of what modern warfare has really evolved into, showing us that we are quite behind on modern warfare and how to fight it. But nevertheless, it is time for us to get on into the news over the past 24 hours, starting with our largest stories first, and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. Before we do, I do have to announce that we do have a Sunday night fundraiser tonight for none other than the highly requested Gary Sinise Foundation, an absolutely incredible nonprofit, very similar to the Wounded Warrior Project, that was actually started by the actor Gary Sinise, which many of y'all would know of Forrest Gump fame, of Lieutenant Dan. The fundraiser helps out wounded U.S. veterans and soldiers who have returned back from overseas and helps them with mental counseling, provisions of housing, and other important things that are able to keep these soldiers in decent condition, considering that they have given nearly everything overseas in the service of this republic. And so I hope that we do see that this fundraiser hits that $2.5 thousand goal tonight, because it is going to a great cause and is helping out many U.S. Soldiers and veterans who have given nearly everything in the service of this country. And so with that, it is time for us to get on into the breaking news that we have over the course of the day. But before we do that, right when I said that, we have to pause because we have breaking news coming out at this moment. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so the famous breaking news right at the very beginning. We have to have this right here, or it's not a good stream. So right now we are hearing that sirens are currently going off in Bahrain due to incoming Iranian drones. So it looks like Bahrain's under attack, and if they're under attack, I would assume that the other Gulf states are likely to follow. So we are seeing an attack by Iran toward those states right now, and we're also hearing from the Israeli military. They have just stated that the IDF has begun a wide-scale wave of strikes targeting the Iranian terror regime infrastructure in Tehran. So there is another massive wave of strikes taking place in Tehran right now. So it's definitely no small attack tonight. We've gotten already tons of footage of the U.S. striking and Israel striking earlier today, and apparently they're going for it again. So massive volleys taking place right now. But that is the breaking news as it stands.
And we'll be waiting to get further news, if there is, while we're covering the news live on air. And moving us on into our major developments within the region, we have been able to see some very significant developments inside of the region, especially inside of Tehran over the course of the day. Over the past 24 hours, the United States and Israel have been conducting significant aerial operations against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and once again, particularly the capital of the country. Major strikes have been seen in multiple different angles, multiple different clips, and multiple different areas of the city, showing what we can only describe as absolutely voluminous and massive airstrikes, which we can see in this first clip right here. Dang.
Now, I'd say that is a massive strikes. Massive strikes. Now, I'm just saying, like, this is small compared to what it's going to be. Like, I'm telling you, if Iran don't open it straight up by Monday night, all hell's going to break loose.
Good Lord. And really quickly, folks, I'm actually going to have to stop this footage because Discord has decided to crap out. So give me just a second, folks, that way I can try and get Matthew back on air here really quickly. I was wondering why he wasn't saying anything, and it's because the Discord ain't working. So let me get him back on air really quickly because it was working up until just a moment ago, and then it decided to stop working. So let's get him back on the call, and let's get him back on the screen right here.
Good. There we go.
And now let's get back to watching the strikes that were happening inside of Tehran. We're not exactly sure who was conducting these significant strikes, but we can see large blue orbs of fire in the middle of the explosions, suggesting that some limited amounts of power infrastructure were knocked out in the surrounding streets in the midst of these strikes. But we do not believe that these are the threatened energy infrastructure strikes that the President of the United States was talking about yesterday, as that would still be about 24 hours away from actually happening if it happens.
You don't think Israel's gone ahead and jumped the gun and started hitting the electrical sites, do you? Like that, because the U.S. gave the ultimatum about 48 hours. They're the ones who said that. Israel didn't say that. So I've heard that Israel's encouraging the United States to go and strike broad strikes across the power infrastructure inside of Iran. So I wonder if Israel might have jumped the gun, because that does look like electrical flashes in the distance, at least in my opinion. It appears like it.
It
It
does.
does appear that is.
It actually does. It does appear like they have struck some kind of electric grid. I'm not for sure if it's electric, if it's the power plant, or if it is a power plant, I should say. But I mean, it definitely looks like some massive explosions and some blue flashes that's coming up from the blasts.
The case, but severed wires near to the area of the explosion, like overhead power lines that had been severed by, say, shrapnel or just the sheer shockwave of the explosive force, could have led to transformers tripping and then leading to those larger blue explosions that we're seeing. So it doesn't necessarily dictate that energy infrastructure strikes are happening, because those would be happening on substations and power plants that provide power to a wider area. So I would say that that probably isn't happening just yet. But I mean, at the same time, folks, we can't put it out of the perspective that Israel jumps the gun every chance they get, and generally escalates this conflict well out of proportion. But I would generally have to say for now, I don't think that these are the energy infrastructure strikes, and I don't think that Israel has jumped the gun just yet.
I don't think so.
Hopefully not, because if they did, that would be a very premature thing to do, to say the least. So hopefully they haven't.
Now you see the strikes continuing in this clip, as it finally begins to become quiet as more strikes continue in the distance. Moving us on from that clip and on into our next one, we also were able to see additional strikes inside of Tehran in this clip as well. So this is generally in the very similar area of the city. We believe that these are actually the same strikes, but from a different angle. We see the major airstrikes once again from this angle, once again showing us those larger blue orbs of light coming from some sort of a transformer explosion or something along those lines.
I've heard that some of these strikes right here are targeting the Yazd missile city, apparently on the outskirts of Tehran. So that might be where some of these flashes are coming from.
Actually, Yazd is a whole different city. I think like 200 miles away or so. It's down about here. So those aren't generally outside of Tehran because they're a fairly far distance away. I've seen a lot of people misquoting that today, that Yazd's missile city is outside of Tehran, and it's like, like those people who are saying that on Twitter, it's like, outside of Tehran is in the same country, but almost on the other side of it. I mean, it's like, yeah, kind of, but not quite. But we also were able to see some additional explosions as well inside of Tehran in these pictures right here. It appears that there was a larger amount of fog or smoke over the city when these strikes commenced, making visibility somewhat difficult, and once again, geolocation a lot more difficult to provide, but yet we could still see that major airstrikes had been conducted over the course of the day. Meanwhile, in an undisclosed city somewhere within Iran, we were able to get some video footage showing us that there were Iranian security forces, either at the Basij or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps itself, that were beginning to deploy in the streets once again, as it does appear that they're becoming highly concerned that there might be another attempted civil uprising. Although, to be entirely honest with y'all, over the course of the entirety of the war, we've seen very little indications of a high aptitude of civil unrest within the country, and we believe that this might just be a precautionary measure by the Iranians. But we could see some of those security forces right here. Those guys were actually in a normal car, but they are definitely in the besiegers' uniforms. You see the cameraman continuing to show the blacked out vehicles of the besiege and the internal security forces as they're apparently using this larger open field that appears to be an undeveloped plot. It doesn't even appear to be a public park, as some sort of a staging ground for future operations to try and continue to put down the Iranian public if there was any uprisings, which we haven't seen any indication of so far. Moving us on a little bit over towards the southwest of Tehran, we also were able to see that over the course of the day, there was a pretty spectacular missile failure that happened near to the area of Fardis in the Alborz province, which is just to the southwest of Tehran, and was apparently visible from Tehran when the failure occurred. Here is that clip showing this missile failure that happened right outside the city of Tehran. You see the missile right there. You see, that's the opposite way. It's supposed to be going up and out, not down and out. And it's going out. They got that part right, but a little bit too close to home.
Look at it come back down. Now they're gonna have a little bit of a debris situation, it looks like.
Man, the Iranians are about to say, a mountainside has been flattened due to falling debris, inshallah. It's like, man, that's some falling debris, I tell you. But moving us on further down and into the missile city at Yazd, we have been able to hear that outside of the city of Yazd, which I have to show you right here, because this is a city that's largely unknown within Iran, and for some reason, I've seen a decent amount of people on Twitter today reposting information about Yazd's missile city and saying that it's at Tehran, but Yazd's missile city is Yazd's missile city because it's the underground subterranean complex that Iran houses and stores a great deal of missiles, missile launchers, and other equipment from out of the city of Yazd, which is why it is Yazd's missile city. We were able to see that there were significant strikes being conducted at the missile city once again today, with the footage visible from Yazd looking over the mountain ranges nearby, showing us the strikes that are once again happening directly onto the location.
Oh, wow.
Bright imminence.
It's like morning glory over the mountains right there, and also a little spotlight out front. Also, by the way, apologies, folks. There is a bit of a typo, as many people are pointing out right now. It says Ian, but it meant to say Iran. So if you see that there on the fourth option, I'm not accusing anybody named Ian of any type of, illicit activities or something like that. It's merely a typo. It means to say Iran.
Let me say this. While Matthew's trying to be diplomatic, I got to tell you that Ian is a little shrimp. Y'all make sure to vote for that option because Ian is a weakling. He can't respond worth a damn. Moving on from that, we have also been able to see another clip from Yazd showing the strikes near Missile City. See how that guy just said in Farsi, Yazd, at the beginning of that? That confirms, folks, we are in Yazd. That's how I did geolocation on that clip. And also the other folks on Twitter did the geolocation that way as well.
What is that, propaganda in the distance? I'm hearing some guy shouting on a loudspeaker. That doesn't sound like a call to prayer either.
No, it doesn't. Maybe it's
music, actually. I thought music was outlawed in Iran.
I thought that was haram. Let me go pull that up. Is music haram in Iran? Okay, so music is not inherently banned in Iran, but it is tightly regulated and restricted based on Shari interpretations. Music deemed intoxicating, immoral, or Western is considered haram by authorities. So apparently that music, I guess, is falling through like the classification lines. I wonder if the song God, Syria, and Al-Bashar falls within the confines of being non-intoxicating music. I feel like you get drunk and stupid off of the just absolutely stupid lyrics of that song and the melody of it, but that's just me personally. Still, Missile City has been absolutely slammed over the day once again, and this is about the second day in a row that we've actually seen that Missile City has been directly targeted and hit quite heavily, at least publicly, by U.S. forces within the region. We believe that this is an attempt to try and degrade Iran's missile and drone launching capabilities, as these larger underground bunkers and storage facilities like Missile City provide a decent amount of munitions so that way Iran can sustain their fire against Gulf state allies, U.S. forces, and Israel within the larger area of the region. Over in Isfahan, we also saw that similar strikes were also being conducted by the United States as well, and an IRGC base near to the area of Isfahan had been directly hit in strikes prior.
زاد جنوب سفارش.
Moving on from that clip and out of Isfahan, we've also been able to see that further on over and in Karamabad, we were able to see additional strikes that were conducted here as well, confirming that there has been a wider sweeping amount of interior airstrikes inside of the country, but we haven't really been seeing a large number or reports of significant airstrikes that have been conducted near to the area of the Strait of Hormuz on combatant forces that are currently within that area. And that moves us on directly down into that region as the crisis is still worsening at this moment. I want to quickly show y'all something here really quickly because we have two different price brackets or price measurements that we have to show y'all here. So let me try and find this as well. And here we go. So Brent crude had hit about $114 according to reports today, and also crude had surpassed over $100 per barrel. I have to put in mind, folks, that right now it's the weekend, so this isn't directly reflected in the market statements on Google, and currently it is kind of doing its pre-market fluctuations at the moment. But currently, from what we're hearing, when the markets open, right now, Brent crude is going to be around $114 per barrel, and crude is going to be finally over $100 for one of the few times in a good minute. It's actually been a little while since we've seen WTI crude surpass around $100 per barrel. For a very short time in early March, we had actually seen that was the case, which I wish it would reflect it right here because it appears that was wiped off of the graph because it was such a short-term rise over 100. But we also understand that Brent crude has also been rising in price as well, of course, quite significantly compared to its pre-war prices, which were near to about $60 a barrel, and WTI crude was also around $60 a barrel as well.
And also, what a wild price swing that we're seeing right now with the oil. Like earlier today, it was just skyrocketing. Like you said, the WTI was over 100, Brent was over 114, and that was just a couple hours ago. All of a sudden, it dropped down out of nowhere for no apparent reason. By the way, the thing just came down. There was no plan that was announced to reopen the strait, nothing that should have brought it down, but somehow it came down anyway, which honestly baffles me quite a lot. I have no idea why it did that.
There is a high amount of volatility. That's definitely what that's showing, and we don't really know what's leading to the massive fluctuations, the humongous skyrockets in price, and then the plummets that come afterwards. But they've been almost at a steady pace over the past few days. Let me try and show y'all this here the best I can. Y'all can see right here, at least with Brent crude, that it would kind of fluctuate in between $100 and about $95 every single day, generally ebbing and flowing almost like a wave. But as of yesterday, it started to surpass the 100 mark, and now it appears to be fluctuating in between $100 per barrel and all the way up to about $111 per barrel right now. It did go up to about $114 a little while ago, and it's now dropping once again. Crude oil, or WTI crude, is conducting very similar fluctuations. And to be entirely honest with y'all, if y'all looked at this 5-day graph, it's almost like watching a heartbeat or so of just about at the morning, or more so the afternoon, around 3 o'clock every afternoon, the oil prices reach their lowest. And you can pretty much see that as an ongoing trend over and over every single day, even right here as well, where it once again reaches its low point, and then it rises once it enters the nighttime hours, and then on into the middle of the day the next day. It's really interesting with that. We don't know what's causing that, because purchase orders are generally filled out on a 24/7 schedule or a 24/7 basis, and that's why you would see that normally oil prices, while fluctuating from day to day, didn't really fluctuate that much in price, and not only that, at a consistent rate where it dropped every afternoon and then skyrocketed until the next afternoon. It's a really weird sort of an occurrence that we're seeing right now, but we still understand that the oil crisis is worsening at the moment, and not only that, the situation for other goods and other important raw materials is also worsening. We have been able to hear that there is apparently going to be an expected abrupt halt to liquefied natural gas shipments from the Gulf within the next 10 days, which will largely lead to a complete cessation of liquefied natural gas purchases and usage within Europe and possibly even within the United States as well, at least to a larger extent.
And also, that's mainly going to be affecting Asia for the most part, because the energy crisis and the natural gas situation, that's going to affect them quite badly, because we're already seeing right now that the South Korean stock market's fallen over 6% on the day, because obviously those markets are panicking about the fact that the natural gas is going to get cut off in about 10 days. So that's concerning the hell out of them. So we're seeing, I think they might have had a circuit breaker trip about an hour ago. I can't recall that for certain, but it's very volatile right now in South Korea's stock market.
Yeah, it definitely is volatile. We'll have to get to that here in a little bit. But moving us on down and into the area of the Strait of Hormuz itself, we have also been able to see that Iran has started to threaten complete closure over the threat that the United States will start to completely obliterate Iranian power plants. So the Iranians have now made it clear that if the United States does attack and start destroying power plants, the Iranians are going to completely shut down the Strait of Hormuz, even for their own vessels, and completely stop the flow of any vessels going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, from what we're understanding right now. We have also been able to see as well that over the course of the day in the Strait of Hormuz, an F-15E Strike Eagle was conducting maneuvers and combat operations as a part of a sortie in the area, and the Iranians claimed that they had shot it down, but I'm going to show you all these clips here, and I'm going to point out the absolute hilarity of the claim that they shot this thing down. When you see that they are actively tracking on their air defense system, we believe it's a Majid, like the last air defense system that targeted the F-35, and in that whole clip right there, that's 13 seconds long, nothing happened. Now, here is the other clip, and this one's the interesting one because this one is the one that technically the Iranians claimed showed the F-15 getting shot down and getting directly hit. Here's the clip. There's the F-15. Oh, by the way, I need to mention this. There's the missile. So there goes the missile. It's completely missed the plane.
Look at that. Also, by the way, is this the best resolution they have on their visual targeting systems? Because it's very zoomed out.
This is about the best that we think they have, but this one's a lot more zoomed out than the last clip. This clip was a lot more zoomed in. This one wasn't. So for some reason they zoomed out at some point on the clip, which is a little bit interesting. But I want to point this out here really quickly, everyone. That's the missile that they fired. It's clearly missed the aircraft. We don't know where it went, but it went off to the left of screen, which is getting nowhere close to even hitting that F-15. And then at the end of the clip, this happens. Now, this guy in Farsi is saying something along the lines of, "Oh, we got it, we got it." So here's the problem with that. Let me show you something in normal footage. Let's see. Let me see if I can show this to y'all. So what they were claiming was, "Oh my God, we hit it! Look, we got it!" It's the F-15 deploying chaff, which puts off an incredibly hot thermal signature and is made to throw off incoming thermal missiles. Now, here's what's interesting about that. These air defense systems that we think the Iranians are using are called Majids. And let me go show you all that here really quickly. So this is a Majid. It's a truck-mounted man-pad or man-portable air defense system that has 4 air defense missiles mounted onto it. These are not advanced, and they generally claim that this thing has a passive radar. In reality, what it has is a simple camera that can pick up moving targets in the air, and once they pick something up, they try and get a thermal lock with their man-pad on whatever's above them, and then they try and shoot at it and take it down. These missiles, unlike the other ones that we talk about in air defense, are driven by heat. They look for a heat signature and they lock on to that. Unlike other missiles, like for example the Patriots or the THAAD missiles that use a radar signature and also have semi-active radar homing capabilities. These missiles require a heat signature. That's why this F-15 is firing off chaff. And I saw someone say that's actually, let's see here. I think someone
Flares.
said, yeah, that's flare. Actually, correction, folks, it's flares. Chaff is the little metallic bits that they throw out to throw off the radar signatures. This is chaff right here. And they put out an incredibly hot thermal signature that guides that missile away from the F-15's thermal exhaust and towards to the hot burning pieces of flares that are up there in the air. So that is...
And also another dead giveaway as well is when Iran likes to publish these videos and they'll claim they hit something and they immediately cut the video immediately after the alleged hit. That's always a huge red flag. Because it's why wouldn't you show an extra 10 or 15 seconds to prove that the aircraft was actually shot at and actually hit? But they cut it off quick. So to me, that's a bad sign.
Yeah. Also, by the way, folks, I see a lot of people saying it's not chaff, it's flares. I know. Sorry, folks. I'm trying to do this all off the top of my head. It's hard to keep it in mind because chaff and flares are usually deployed very close to each other, and they're usually equipped on the aircraft almost in the same spot. So my mind's just going to whatever word comes to my mind. The quickest and the easiest one to say is chaff. Flares, for some reason, wasn't the one on my mind, but it still is flares, which is once again another Iranian deception because the Iranians claimed by this footage today that they had shot down this F-15, and that confirmed a direct hit on the aircraft. What this confirms is that they completely missed the aircraft because we saw the missile in the clip prior just seconds before, and then secondly, we also saw that the the aircraft was deploying its flares, which was meaning that it was trying to throw off the incoming missile from its thermal signature, which is once again confirming the aircraft was not hit. So moving on out of that clip, which is a pretty hilarious one at that, to think that the Iranians are trying to claim they took it down when clearly they didn't. We also been able to get some other news out of the Strait of Hormuz. We have been able to hear that the oil prices are rising higher. Earlier in the day, which this was the reports that we were getting, at least at the time, Brent oil had risen to about $114 per barrel, and WTI crude had hit about over 100. At the moment now, as we checked on Google, it appears to have dropped, and it's not reflecting this rise that we were able to document earlier in the day, about 4 hours ago. But still, it does appear that the oil markets are still quite volatile, and the prices are continuing to rise as the supply starts to largely dwindle. We've also been able to hear that as a result of this, we've started to hear some news from I-24 about some senior American officials that have apparently spoken to them. Senior American officials have told their counterparts in Israel and other countries in recent days that there will probably be no choice, and the U.S. will be forced to conduct a ground operation to capture the Iranian island of Karg, according to two sources familiar with the details. The island of Karg is responsible for 90% of the oil exported to China, and in recent days, discussions have begun in the American administration about whether to capture the island in order to cause Iran to stop preventing ships from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. If this is the plan, talk about jumping the barrel and going straight for the prize instead of what's in front of it. How in the hell are the Marine Expeditionary Units, the 11th and the 31st, on board the Triple E and the Boxer, supposed to get to Karg Island when they can't even get through Hormuz first? They're saying, let's take Karg Island to open up the Strait of Hormuz, but to get to Karg Island, we've got to go through the Strait of Hormuz to get there. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But while we're talking about that, a lot of people are hearing about the Iranian threat that was also issued today. I thought the poll was actually on the Strait of Hormuz first, but we have been able to hear that the Iranians are now threatening that if they are hit, they are going to plunge the entire region into an absolute blackout. And Matthew, what are people currently thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so the big looming situation right now is there's currently 24 hours left on the U.S. ultimatum toward Iran that if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, then all the power plants inside of Iran are going to be targeted and destroyed by U.S. airstrikes. So obviously that's a huge escalation to say the least, but Iran is now threatened today to carry out the threat that we thought they might carry out. They're going to try to plunge the entire Middle East into darkness by hitting the desalination plants and also the power plants inside the Gulf states if the U.S. carries out that attack on the power plants. So what are your thoughts? 54% said this will start a massive crisis, while 31% said Ian can't respond that severely, and 9% said I'm 50-50 on this one. And I would say that I believe Iran still has the ability to at least make limited strikes on the power facilities and also the desalination plants as well. We also have to keep something else in mind, that right now the interceptor stocks inside the Gulf states is still running low. So they're not able to intercept everything that's coming in. And if Iran starts firing drones and missiles, that could easily overwhelm any air defense in the Gulf states. And then all their critical infrastructure is wide open at that point. So that's a major issue. So I would say, I think if the U.S. carries this out, we're looking at a possible humanitarian crisis of unbelievable scale that we've never had to deal with before. So, you know, I'm not sure if the U.S. is maybe bluffing on this. I would really be surprised if they're bluffing on something this major. I think personally, and also based on Israel encouraging the United States to carry out these strikes, it sounds to me like it's likely going to take place, and Iran probably will exact vengeance at that point. So this is going to be very interesting and very horrifying to watch if this gets carried out this way. So I'm with the 54%. I think it's going to be a big crisis. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that in my honest opinion, this is going to start a massive crisis. Hitting Iranian power plants is going to create a massive humanitarian crisis in Iran, and once the Iranians conduct a reciprocal attack on all of our allies in the region, it's going to start a major humanitarian crisis on our side in the region as well. This would be an absolutely disastrous sort of an idea to see followed through on, and the reality of it is, folks, is that there's really no way to even back out of this or go forward with it without losing face either way. If we back out of it, We have lost face because we threatened the Iranians with a major threat, and then we didn't follow through, showing that our word sometimes doesn't really mean much. If we then follow through with the attack, we're going to be losing face with all of our Gulf state allies because they're going to get slammed in return by the Iranians, and then they're going to start losing their power supplies throughout the entirety of the region, which is going to start seeing a humanitarian crisis pretty much start unfolding immediately in all of our allied nations within the region. So this isn't good at all. I mean, either way, folks, we're basically picking in between two bad options. Either we lose face with the Iranians and we make it look like the United States is weak at that point, which could then be pounced on by the Chinese and the Russians in some form of military support to the Iranians because they might think they may be able to chance it at that point because U.S. threats don't really mean that much in the conflict, or we actually follow through with the threat and then we see that the damage to our allies is insurmountable, much like it would be inside of Iran. So this was generally an asinine threat to even throw out in the first place, and now it's going to be ending up even more destructive, really, no matter how we work around it at this point, whether we follow through with it or we don't. I would say, to be entirely honest with y'all folks, I think the better conclusion at this point, the better option out of the two poor decisions that we have at this point, would be to back off and not follow through with those strikes, because I think it would be a lot better for us to see the lack of a humanitarian crisis in the region rather than creating one by our very own hands. If the Russians and the Chinese try and pounce on the Iranians, we can try and face that down at a whole other situation, and that might be a little bit complicated and messy in its own sense, but we would generally have to try and deal with that instead of seeing a humanitarian crisis be created, because then also on top of that, what does that mean for the region going on from there in the long term beyond just tomorrow? If all of these countries start to see the United States basically got them screwed, and they're without power and they're seeing massive humanitarian issues develop inside of their countries, why in the world would they want to be U.S. aligned in the future? And they might start to think that, and they might start to shift their priorities more towards the Chinese, meaning that we're basically losing our own sphere by our own actions.
Yeah, and also on top of that, like I see folks saying in here, some people are like, "Oh, well, why are you guys opposed to striking the power plants inside of Iran? Because obviously Iran's not abiding by the rules of war, so why should we in the United States?" It's honestly, I will say this, obviously the rules of war in the Geneva Convention is very important. We don't want to ignore that. But I would say the bigger issue here is Iran still has the capability to respond to it. And for that reason alone, we should think very carefully before doing this. If the U.S. wants to strike power plants, and we're not talking about the legality of it, that's an entirely separate issue. But if they wanted to do that, they need to make sure that all of Iran's missile capabilities are taken out first before they even attempt to try to strike the power plants. Because if Iran has the capability, which it appears they do, then striking Iran's power plants is going to create a reciprocal response on the Gulf states, and they're going to have a humanitarian crisis where there's no electricity or water in their countries. So for the people that are in favor of these strikes, I mean, we have to take that in consideration. We can't just let the entire region start, dying of thirst because they're out of water, and that's a real possibility if Iran carries out their threat, which at this point, there's no reason that they wouldn't for the most part, because they've pretty much followed through with most of the stuff they've said. So, we have to think about the people, and also you have to think about the Iranian people as well. If we start attacking the civilian infrastructure all over Iran, that's going to affect the regime, obviously, but it's also going to affect the people inside of Iran. Anything we do to civilians, that's affecting the normal everyday people that are being oppressed by the crazy regime. So, I mean, that's why, attacking civilian infrastructure, that's a major step. And most of the time, it's actually not illegal for the most part. So it's not something to take lightly whatsoever. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, I would have to definitely agree with Matthew on that. I think the best way to describe that is, does the risk outweigh the reward? And in that sort of a scenario, the risk far outweighs any sort of possible reward we could get from attacking those installations. One, we turn a lot of people in Iran who were American allies into supporters of the Islamic regime, because now we are inflicting suffering directly upon those people, whether or not they supported the U.S. or the Islamic regime, meaning that we would see that a lot of support on the ground for a new government in Iran would start to fizzle out almost outright. We can almost guarantee that no matter what the Iranians do in response to the attacks. Once those attacks are conducted, and once we see that damage put into place, which that risk far outweighs the reward already, then the Iranians also have the ability to conduct a reciprocal attack against our allies in the region and strike and knock out their energy infrastructure. And we've already seen by days prior, folks, that the United States and our allied air defenses are not that voluminous and well equipped to be able to stop every Iranian attack, and they've already proven that they were able to hit critical oil infrastructure that for most of these countries would be a top priority for defensive purposes, and yet they weren't able to defend them. So that means that power plants are going to be as vulnerable because they would be about as high priority as the oil refineries and the oil loading ports. They're going to be as vulnerable as the oil facilities, meaning that those are basically open for the taking by the Iranians to hit and knock out. And if they do that to all of our allies in the region, not only is that going to sour their opinion of us, because they will have known that those reciprocal attacks were only conducted because we conducted an attack on the Iranian power plants, they're also going to possibly start shifting at the governmental levels inside of that region after this war is long said and done with towards our enemies like the People's Republic of China, and possibly trying to align with them because they might be thinking that they would provide better security and better safety for them and their economic operations and security than the United States could, considering that the United States makes decisions recklessly that could end up damaging their abilities and their condition.
Also, by the way, here's another thing that people haven't talked about yet either. The U.S. is jumping up the escalation ladder really quickly. Like there's a series of escalations that take place in a war. Like right now, they're jumping very high up on the ladder by starting to attack the power plants inside of Iran. So, when you jump up the escalation ladder that quickly, you start running out of options because you start taking away pretty much all your leverage at that point. So, that's very dangerous because if you start doing things like hitting the power plants and then Iran retaliates by hitting the Gulf states power plants and desalination facilities, what's left at that point? The U.S. starts, reaching the end of the escalation ladder, and what's at the end of it is nuclear weapons. That's what's at the end of it. If we're talking about this realistically here, so I mean, it gets dangerous really quickly, and that's why we should slow down a little bit here before we start going too berserk and making rash choices by hitting this, because I don't think the U.S. is ready for this humanitarian crisis that's going to be taking place. We're already kind of struggling with the Strait of Hormuz situation. So now to also put a humanitarian crisis on top of it, that might break the camel's back right there. So I'm not totally convinced about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd have to say I'm not really all too convinced on it either. And to also speak about another important topic that we've been already covering on the news so far, the U.S. is seriously considering an attempt to either force landing in the area of the Strait of Hormuz or more so over in Karg Island. But much like we've been talking about here on the channel, there is a significant amount of risks and issues about the possibility of taking Karg Island. And this is what some analysts had to say today about this very situation. This is from other analysts outside of this channel. The U.S. troops may well take Karg Island only to endure ballistic missile strikes, drone attacks, and petrochemical smoke, all without a reliable means of obtaining logistical support. The result could be a grinding war of attrition that more closely resembles the battle space in Ukraine than it does the shock and awe style campaigns that Americans are used to. Iran has given every indication that it will likely escalate by striking oil and gas facilities in the region, just as it did to Qatar and Saudi Arabia after the Pars South gas field was struck. Ground casualties and the destruction of oil infrastructure throughout the region would almost certainly create pressure on the president to pull out, but extracting troops under loitering munitions is dangerous, and aircraft on the ground are prime targets for these circling drones. Conversely, if the United States managed to take a hold on the Karg, the Iranian regime could find itself without the means to export its oil and unable to survive. Iran would then be forced to give the United States some, even much, of what it wants in exchange for control of the island. So it's a bit of a gamble, but once again, a fairly dangerous one. And I've seen a lot of people talking about Karg Island in the chat, and a lot of people who are, of course, I would have to say clearly, in the Department of Defense, because many people have been telling me, oh, Enforcer, you're absolutely wrong. You can go and take Karg Island every single day, and it would be no problem at all. You don't have to actually have the amphibious ready groups make it to Karg Island to support an offensive. You could just take it from some place like Kuwait or Bahrain. That's a great idea. Let's go look at the 82nd Airborne Division and its structural capabilities. So this is the 82nd Airborne Division in all of its glory. This is actually what it looks like to a general. You don't get to look at all the cool vehicles and stuff. Like, this is actually how the analysis side of things work. And this is how the 82nd Airborne is structured. So let me talk about what in the world would happen if the 82nd was the one charged with the responsibility of taking Karg Island. So, the 82nd Airborne Division is made up of 6 brigades. One of them is a sustainment brigade. One of them is a combat aviation brigade, meaning that it generally uses attack helicopters and other forms of armed helicopters to be able to provide close air support to its infantry, One brigade is an entire artillery brigade for the 82nd, and then it has three brigade combat teams, all of them incredibly light because this is a quick reaction force of a brigade design, and it's generally created for air assault operations, meaning that they get dropped off by helicopter and they are lightly equipped. And the reason why they are lightly equipped is to help them with maneuverability and to also help them with being able to take ground quickly and hold it until they're relieved. This is the only force, if the 11th and 31st are not able to get through the Strait of Hormuz on the Boxer and the Tripoli, this is the only force that could have an ability of taking Karg Island. Now, Black Hawk helicopters have a range of about 700 miles, meaning that they have a decent amount of range to be able to make it to Karg from Kuwait, which would be about 160 miles, and then actually loiter around the area. The issue with that is, however, is that UH-60 Black Hawks are lightly armed and cannot provide ground support or aerial fire support to the ground forces that will be landing by helicopter on Karg Island. That means that the forces of the 82nd would be relying at that point on U.S. air support from the U.S. Air Force and its own built-in helicopter assault support, which comes in the form of Apaches and other attack helicopters that are within its division. And therein lies the problem. An Apache attack helicopter only has a range of about 350 miles or so at the longest, and that's probably as stripped down as you can get an AH-64 to get that kind of a range. That means that an AH-64 would be able to fly from Kuwait to Karg Island, hover around for 10 minutes, and leave. Now, there is one place that such an air operation was conducted before, and it ended up in an absolute disaster, and it's something that is within contemporary memory because it happened in the middle of the coverage on the show, which was the Russian VDV landing at Hostomel Airport, which was a much more favorable position, mind you all, to be entirely frank, because it was 1, north of Kyiv, 2, had a forest belt between it and Kyiv, and 3, was not a small island that generally isolates those forces into the specific area of the airfield itself. The Russians were not able to provide any close air support for any long duration of time to the VDV forces that it dropped on the ground because the Ka-52s and Mi-28s that were providing that fire support were reaching their maximum range by the time they arrived at this airport, meaning that they had to then withdraw after about only 20 minutes of covering fire and leave the VDV on the ground to be able to try and fend for itself against the Ukrainian counterattacks. Literally within the first day of landing, they had been pushed off the airfield and were already near to the northern part of the airstrip when it was cratered by Ukrainian Su-24s and the airfield was rendered unusable as a Russian airhead. A situation where the 82nd Airborne Division is relying on what might become sporadic air support from the Air Force, and it doesn't have the ability to have its AH-64 Apaches in range, would be near certain that a large amount of losses would be seen on that island. They would be able to hold it, but due to the fact that they wouldn't have any larger amount of fire support in the form of their attack helicopters to be able to give them air cover on a near continuous basis, that would be an absolutely horrendous idea to land anyone on Karg Island with that little amount of indirect fire support. Like, that's not.
So you heard it first here tonight, y'all. So I mean, we're just waiting for the clock to tick down for tomorrow night or well Monday night. It's actually 1:30 here, 1:30 a.m. here on the East Coast. But yeah, that's the news for the night. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope I got up to date to what was going on. Make sure y'all don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. Definitely big support to the channel, and it actually helps get us out more for when the platforms actually try to cut us out of the algorithm, so we can actually get more publicity and more more of an audience out there. Really need y'all's help to do that. We really slowed down here the past couple weeks. Really like to get back into getting the subscribers and getting the followers back. But yeah, we have drawings coming up as soon as we actually reach our goals on our platforms. So make sure y'all don't miss out on that. Anything else? That's all. All right, y'all. Well, y'all, I hope y'all have a wonderful night, and I hope y'all have a wonderful Monday morning.